Hi, this is Roger again. This is part 2 of yesterday's episode of picking one of each. So as I was going around watering, which I didn't finish yesterday, that's because I was stopping to film. Normally when I embark on watering everything in here, I get it done in one go, with just a couple of small breaks for a coffee and a snack. But yesterday with the filming I didn't get it all done, so the amount that's left to go today is from here. So there's that tall rack with the blooms on the top and everything over in this corner. But as far as different types of orchids are concerned, that's not that many. I've got 3 or 4 clips left from yesterday that are already filmed that I deliberately left out of yesterday's video on the grounds it would have just been too long. So those will come in today, plus, well, not a lot else really, but there are some to come in. So let's get on with it. Now this is an epidendrum. It's a reed stem epidendrum. They have it's like a class within a class, if you see what I mean. In environments where it's suitable to grow these outside, people grow them as garden plants. They grow into a bush and can be covered in blooms all through the summer. This has had a lot of troubles. I think its troubles are almost over. It needs a repot. The problem is the new growths on here are all cakeys. You see, it starts there. This new growth starts here. They're not coming from the base. In fact, all 3 new growths on here are not coming from the base, which means their roots start out as aerial, and if the growing tip dries up before it hits the media, that's the root stalled, and the roots should be nice and long and filling the pot. So this needs some work done on it. It has lovely orange flowers. They're not large. But they have an unusual pattern. They're like a little, like a bunch of blooms basically. And what happens is the centre keeps growing and it keeps producing new buds. And it gets higher and higher and higher, and the older blooms start to drop off at the bottom. And it can continue. I'm breaking them in for a friend. It can continue for some considerable time and extend quite a long way, and it extends the blooming period dramatically. So if you can get one growing well, they're well worth having. Come in pastel shades, but the ones that appeal to me more are the ones in the rich colours. You can get a rich daffodil yellow, lovely orange like this one, good reds, yeah, pinks, deep pinks. So it comes in all colours. I've even seen a white one. So yeah, worth having, but mine's not a good example. It was a beautiful plant once and the scale got it, took it down, and it's still in a state of recovery, although it looks like it's going to make it now. These new growths look like they're pushing on okay, he says, revealing a leaf with some scale hiding. So they're still not gone. It's another one of those that is a scale magnet. They love it. But anyway, even though it's not growing particularly well, it will still probably bloom next year. So Epidendrum, and that one is Comet Valley Orange Star. There is a nursery that produces epidendrums, hybrids, and they're all called Comet Valley something. In quotes, but they're all called Comet Valley. I forget which one it is now, but somewhere on the somewhere in Europe. Anyway, that's that one. Now this is another type of Dendrobium, and this is delicatum, which is a naturally occurring hybrid. So when you write the name, it has to have an X in the front because it can occur in the wild, and it's of the Kingianum type. Now these come into a separate category simply because they are winter resters, but boy do they need to chill down if you want to get a decent blooming on them. This one has never bloomed. It's perfectly capable of blooming, it's blooming size, but believe it or not, it's not cold enough in here for this one to bloom. This needs to get right down. many will say that if you have an unheated greenhouse that can get down to freezing, that's the place to keep it in the winter. But keep it dry. If it's going to go down that low, keep it dry. These seem incredibly good at holding their canes and not shrivelling with virtually no water through the winter. So if you want to get one of these to bloom, Kingianum types, they need to cool down. They need a proper rest with a good chill, without being silly. But don't get them too cold if they're wet. So in other words, you need to reverse that round. Keep them cold, but don't keep them wet. See, now this has got a lovely pot full of roots, and it's going to get the smallest trickle of water at the moment. And that's going to Carol, because I can't keep it cold enough. So let somebody else have a go and see if they can find somewhere cold enough for it. Greenhouse preferably. Who would you know? Ed's Orchids. He's got one in his unheated greenhouse, or in an unheated greenhouse. I'm not sure it's his, it might be his lady friend's. But he has got a massive one in a bucket, and it blooms spectacularly. And it's kept somewhere unheated in the winter. It needs good light and cool right down, no feed and next to no water. So that's that type. I have another one of those which is Berryoda. That's not mine, it's actually Hannah's. And it was 2 little cakeys that were given to her at the last Wessex show that I potted up. And one of them's coming into bloom and the other one's growing a new shoot. So, you know, they're almost indestructible. But there is a knack to getting them to bloom. So that's that type. Right, 2 reasons for pulling this plant up. In the previous video we had a look at the Dendrobium phalaenopsis types, and I said that I had a bigger example. Well, this is that one that I was referring to. This is banana chocolate. And the second reason is, you're not going to be able to see this. Strictly speaking, nobody should be able to see this. Let me just find a place. There, that leaf. Take a very, very close look at that leaf at the base. Take a look at this leaf, just there, in that area. Now it just looks like white dust. I've just been and got my magnifying glass. That's mites. Now it's not red spider mites, but not all mites are red. Some of them are not. And these are tiny, and they are almost invisible. So that plant has got mites. And I'm going to put the systemic spray on it, and you have to bear in mind, mites are not insects. They're a type of arachnid, and the chemical in my spray might not touch them. But what will touch them is the suffocating type sprays, the soapy wash type sprays. Now the problem is with mites, if this plant has got them, the chances are the plants around this one have also got them. The whole shelf could have them. The whole place could have them, and they've been escaping my eye. And the reason I saw these was that I saw a bunch of them that I thought was scale. And I thought, oh, there's some scale there, hang on. No, they're not. So those are a type of mite. I can't show them to you because I don't think I'd be able to film through my magnifying glass so that you could actually see them. They're not moving, so they're not hyperactive, but nonetheless they're there. So I'm going to give it a spray with the systemic. It might deal with them, but the fact that they're inactive and they're only in a few places, you know, how do I know if they're dead or not? But anyway, that was the larger phalaenopsis type that I mentioned. They can grow quite large. So there we go, that's that one. Right, I'm getting all squashed up here because I had to move the rack on wheels to get at the shelf at the back. This is an example of a true resting type dendrobium. This is lindleyi, or aggregatum as it's more popularly called, quite honestly. Care for this. Doesn't need bright light when it's growing in the growing season. It can grow quite shaded, and it needs feeding and watering quite well to get it to grow nice big fat bulbs in the growing season. And then as it goes into autumn, it will have finished growing naturally. You can see the change in the plant. It goes from pushing out growths, pushing out roots and doing stuff to just slowing down to a standstill. You go with that. You go with the plant. So as it slows up, you slow down with the feed and the watering frequency. But it will still need water right into the period where you stop, but only a bit. Feed stops when it's finished growing. So when there's no more new growths, maturing leaves or anything like that, you stop feeding. And that should be late autumn if it's behaving itself. And then through the winter, it needs the brightest light you can give it and a lower temperature than it had in the daytimes of the growing season. Don't worry too much about the night temperatures, but if you were growing this at say 24, 25 in the growing season, you need to take 8 to 10 degrees off of that for its winter temperature, but there is a bare minimum which if you go below you might damage the plant. So a good cool down in the winter and a dramatic increase in light and it will bloom. Everybody who comes to me and says my lindleyi, I've had it 3 years now, it's a lovely plant, bigger than yours, but it won't bloom. The reason it won't bloom is it's not getting the bright light and it hasn't got that differential between the growing season and the resting season. It needs a distinct cooling. It doesn't mean it needs to be freezing cold. You know, if your growing season temperatures are up in the sort of high 20s into the 30s, then you probably get away with 18, 19 degrees for a winter temperature. It's the difference that seems to matter, and a good increase in light. The trick you play if you can't do really, really bright light for the winter is to keep it more shaded in the summer. And again, it's the difference. So if it was grown quite shaded in the summer in the growing season, and then it went into a brighter position for its winter rest, that'll do it. Even though it might not be really bright light, as long as it's a lot brighter than it was when it was growing. That's that one. Jenkinsii comes into exactly the same growing conditions as that one. So a resting type dendrobium. And this is fully resting now. It's going to get a trickle of water now, only because it's a non-feed run. If I had any feed in that, then it wouldn't get anything. It would get left till next time. And it does get left quite frequently, where it doesn't get any water. Difficult with this one, I mean if you look at that top cane, they're very wrinkled. You'd sort of think, oh it's shrivelling, it needs lots of water. No, that's what they're like. You have to get to know your plant. That's what they're like. That is the natural shape of the bulb, heavily ribbed. Yeah, that's what they look like. So some say you should only give them water in their rest period if they're starting to shrivel. How are you going to tell then? Duh. You've got to keep track basically and just give it a trickle now and again, which is all this is going to get. So a true rester, that one, and appropriate care guide. Right, another dendrobium type. I could say these are my nemesis, the black hair types, but then I'd have to take it back and say some of them. I have tried several more than once and they've still died. The problem with them is they are absolute scale magnets. I reckon, you know, they're coming from other people's greenhouses on the coach. They say, hey, he's got some more black hair types, come on, get your packed lunch, we're off. And they arrive here, somehow. And I lost several because they seriously objected to systemic sprays. So I sprayed them with a systemic and within quite a short space of time they just dumped their leaves. So some of them object. This one doesn't object and it's growing okay. So I'm okay with this one. Now this is a hybrid of some sort. It's probably got infundibulum in it, but it's growing quite strong. It's got a nice new cane here and another one here. Both are still growing. Now they've slowed right up because this would prefer to be warmer, but it's obviously cold tolerant because it hasn't stopped growing, it's just slowed down to a snail's pace basically. And I was just going to say we've got some nubbins here that might push on. This cane has bloomed a couple of times I think, so we're probably waiting for the latest two canes to finish growing and mature, and then we should get some blooms on them. But black hair types, Latoria types, they like similar conditions on the grounds that they don't like to get cold. They don't like getting blasted with a fan because that constitutes a draft. If you're a warmer grower and the fan's too close, it cools them down when they don't want to be cooled down. So they like to stay warm. They don't need ridiculously high humidity, but they do like some humidity around. And they will have periods when they're not growing, and if you have to put up with lower temperatures, that period could be quite long. Now, I'm taking extreme care with this one because it is still slowly growing. If those two canes had matured and there was no growth, this would get next to no water right through the winter. But it's playing games because it's still growing. I've got to give it some water, but it won't get much. They will lose their roots as easy as anything if you've got cool temperatures and a plant that's not growing. So you're getting a pattern with the idea. If you've got to put up with cooler temperatures, you really do need to watch your watering on plants that aren't growing. Watch your plant. But anyway, that's a good example of a black hair type that seems to be doing okay. And as soon as I've watered that, I'm going to spray it because it's been treated. Everything in here got treated twice at the appropriate interval, and I can still see some of the little blighters on here. But this is systemic tolerant, so this is going to get another go. Now they got treated twice with the concentrate. I can't get at it at the moment, it's in the house. So it was a repeat treatment of the same thing, if you see what I mean, because I can mix up my 5 litre sprayer with the concentrate. This time it's going to get sprayed with my spot treatment, which has a different chemical in it. It is systemic, but it's not the same one. So it gets a go with something else this time round. And unfortunately that one stinks the place out, but so be it. Anyway, if you've got one that finishes growing towards the end of the growing season, watch your temperatures and your watering. If kept in the right conditions, these are classed as continuous growers and would be pushing out new growths throughout the year. So they could be doing new growths just starting, roots, canes heading for maturity, buds forming, actually in bloom. It could be doing all of that at the same time if the conditions are right and you're growing it well. I'm not, and it's not. Right, black hair types. As I said, they've been my nemesis. Out of all the Dendrobium types, I've lost more of these than any other type. You behave. And the last of the Dendrobium types, you ready for this? That's a warning shot. That is a Dendrobium nobile type. That's how big some of them get. And boy, is that a top heavy cane. Bit like the dinosaur theory, you know, thin at one end, thin at the other and fat in the middle. But I never expected that to grow that big, given the previous canes down there. That is actually got a spike coming. I hadn't noticed that, I must admit, so I'll mark that one down as in bud. It's just a Dendrobium hybrid, it's got no ID, and this was one of the ones that came from Jeff's collection. It went off to the National Dendrobium collection with Marius, and there were quite a few duplicates, so it came back to me. So it's done the rounds, this one. But it's growing incredibly well. And it's one of the few dendrobiums over on that shelf that's bug free. There's not a sign of anything on this one. Anyway, nobile types, they come into the winter rest category, but when you get the quite complex hybrids, they don't need it applied religiously to the rule book. The rule book is they are a resting type, so as you go into autumn, reduce the feed down. They should have finished that season's growth by the time you get to that point in the year, heading into winter. Cut the feed down to nothing, cut the watering down to next to nothing, right through the winter until you see the buds forming. Now, with me, with nobile types, this one I class as still resting. Yeah? Although it's got some buds, they haven't pushed away and separated yet. The same as if it just had some nubbins showing. As far as I'm concerned, that's still resting. It still doesn't get any feed. Until those nubbins push out and you can actually see some buds starting to form on the end, that's the point where I consider the rest is now over and it's starting to use up resources from the canes to produce the buds, swell them up and eventually produce your blooms. That's when you start applying a bit of help. So as far as I'm concerned, as the buds are starting to form, I'll increase the watering a bit, and then as they really start to form the buds and you can see these are distinct buds and everything, that's when the feed starts going in. And if it's doing its thing properly, around that point it may well start some new growths. If not, the new growths may wait until after the blooms, but around that time. So that's your seasonal growth. New growths from early in the year, push them hard through the growing season, wind them down in autumn into winter, rest them. During the rest, again, cooler than their growing season. They don't need bright light to grow. Yeah, but they do need the bright light in that winter rest and they need to cool down. And bear in mind the ones you buy are often, they have hormones applied that effectively act like growth restrictors, and the knock-on effect, I don't know who found this out, but the knock-on effect is it increases the blooming. So it reduces the cane length and increases the blooming all in one go. We don't get access to these sorts of things. So that's what they're normally like when you buy them. Blooms right virtually the whole length of the cane. Solid mass of blooms. Take a good look, you'll probably never achieve that again. We tend to get blooms in the top half, maybe 2/3 if you're lucky, maybe only 1/3, maybe only a couple at the top. But that will depend on that rest, and the closer you get to those circumstances, the better the blooming will be. So there we go. That will be the last dendrobium as I'm coming round. I don't think there's any more. That's all the types covered that I can think of anyway. So there we go. That's that one. Right, I know I said that was the last one, but I just want to make the point. The nobile hybrids are probably the most popular dendrobiums that people buy, but as I said, yet another warning shot. They can grow pretty big. Now this one is sort of exceptional really, because the size of the blooms, these are massive blooms. Okay, there's only one there, that's blooming out of season, this one. It's been in bloom ages. But they can have large blooms, but a lot of the time they're not that big. And this particular plant was next to the one that had the mites, and there are a few on this plant as well. So I'm going to have to get at those. Luckily this time of year they don't do very well, it's too cold, so they don't breed very good. Nonetheless they're there, and I don't want them getting out of hand because those can do some serious damage. Anyway, that's another nobile type. You can see the sort of size they get to, and they're always top heavy and they fall over. A flipping nuisance, he says. Right, this is my only Arangus left now. My fastuosa went to Sean, and my Mr. Sidii just collapsed. You know, over a period of a couple of days, it dumped all its leaves. This is the only one I have left out of the 3, and this one isn't currently growing, it's on hold. The fact that it's on hold, it's not collapsing and it's not dropping leaves, I think it's putting up with the lower temperatures. It might not be its favourite environment, but it's holding on. That's the important thing. And again, Arachnis, infinitely variable. They can come from deep shade down near the forest floor. They can come from quite high up in trees. Some of them are very specific. There are a couple of species that are only found on one type of tree and not found anywhere else. Try growing that one in cultivation then. But yeah, some of them are quite fussy. Quite a few of them grow in ravines, sort of over water, in the trees that are directly above water or alongside. So I think, you know, the humidity is, you know, where they grow is a clue basically. They do like humidity, these. Little bit of airflow, not a mad draft, but they do like good humidity. So they're not ideal to grow in the home. And as I said, this one's hanging in there. But each species needs to be looked up and checked because they've got variable conditions across the genus, basically, from shade to high light to cool to warm. Yeah, so check out what you've got and do the best you can. This should come into bloom next year. It's got some new growths on there, and it's doing okay, but it's quite different in its appearance to a lot of the Arachnis, which tend to look like little Phalaenopsis. They've got quite leathery, thick, fleshy leaves. This one hasn't. This one looks different, and the blooms are quite different as well, which is why I like it a lot. I didn't like it when I first got it, but I do now. Anyway, Arachnis. Right, another one in the Oncidium alliance. This is a Rossioglossum. This is Rawdon Jester. Now this was quite a big plant, and it naturally split into 2 when I repotted it. It hasn't long been repotted, and it's matured its latest growth, which did produce some roots. And it's sort of on hold now, so this doesn't need much water at the moment because it's not growing. I'm hoping that it will bloom on the next new growth. But these have a reputation of needing to be a good sized plant before they actually bloom. It needs to be a lot of backup strength in the plant to actually produce the spike. And if you saw the size of the blooms, you'd understand why. They're 5 or 6 inches across. They're absolutely massive, and a spike can have 4 or 5 on a well-grown plant. They are massive, and obviously it's capable of draining the plant quite badly. So the plant's clever enough to not try unless it knows it can do it, sort of thing. But hopefully we may get some blooms next time round. They are in the Oncidium alliance, yes, but they are closer to Odontoglossum than many of the other types in the alliance. So I would suggest that care for this is similar to an Odontoglossum. Don't go mad with the bright light. So, you know, shady to mid-light. Keep them moist when they're growing and give them some feed. And certainly if they decide to produce a spike, help them. They'll need it. And they will have what I would class as a dormant period when they're not growing. There's no spikes, there's no root activity, no growing tips, and no new growths like what this one is now. So this only needs a gentle trickle just to stop it, you know, dehydrating. And then we'll wait for a new growth. The other one of these is going to Carol. So good luck with that. And yeah, Rossioglossum. Probably been reclassified and I'm making a right pig's ear of it. Who knows? Okay, I got all the clips off onto the computer, and effectively there's far too much to go into one video, so I'll end part 2 here and we will have a part 3 tomorrow, and I'll make them into a set, into a playlist, and yeah, we'll go from there. Thanks for dropping by. I hope you're enjoying this sort of thing that I'm doing. It's I haven't done it before, so it's a first time, and As I say, it's a way of looking at the genera I've got with a little bit of a care guide introduced as well, and some of the problems I've had, and I hope it's useful. See you next time. Thanks for dropping by.